Boris Johnson has been admitted to hospital tonight after his coronavirus symptoms worsened, ultimately throwing the government into disarray. Prime Minister Boris Johnson was admitted to hospital 10 days after his coronavirus diagnosis. The Prime Minister is expected to stay overnight and undergo tests as a precautionary measure. This has raised concerns on the leadership of the country as the coronavirus health crisis grips the nation. Boris Johnson has been self-isolating after confirming that he had tested positive for coronavirus, but if his health deteriorates, it is expected to cause concern and confusion in government. BBC political editor Laura Kuntzberg claimed the government will be holding a special meeting following the Prime Minister's admittance to hospital. She wrote on her Twitter, "Boris Johnson was taken to hospital earlier this evening. He has been admitted, so is expected to stay in overnight. He is having what is described as routine tests." Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab is expected to chair a coronavirus. Newly elected Labour leader Keir Starmer took to Twitter after hearing the news about the Tory leader. He wrote, wishing the Prime Minister well and a speedy recovery. This comes after the Prime Minister wrote an open letter to the leaders of the opposition for teamwork during this health crisis. BBC's Chris Mason reflected on the difficulties the admittance to hospital could mean for Boris Johnson's government going forward. He said, "There were some conversations 10 days ago that Dominic Raab, the first Secretary of State, may assume the responsibilities of the Prime Minister in the event the Prime Minister is unable to continue." Mr. Mason was asked by the BBC host on whether Boris Johnson would be forced to pass on his powers if his health worsened significantly. The host said, "We have had prime ministers ill but never under these circumstances. Is this a job someone can do for a few hours a day if they are having tests and recovering? Does Boris Johnson need to pass over powers related to national security? How does it work?" Mr. Mason replied, "There isn't the same formula like that in the USA, a transfer of power to the vice president for the period the president is incapacitated. Boris Johnson happens to be unwell with the very issue that is causing the national emergency that he is dealing with." A Downing Street spokeswoman said, on the advice of his doctor, the Prime Minister has tonight been admitted to hospital for tests. This is a precautionary step, as the Prime Minister continues to have persistent symptoms of coronavirus 10 days after testing positive for the virus. The Prime Minister thanks NHS staff for all of their incredible hard work and urges the public to continue to follow the government's advice to stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives. Number 10 sources said the Prime Minister continues to have persistent symptoms, including a high temperature. The source said, for purely precautionary reasons, he has gone to hospital for tests. This was not an emergency admission and the decision was taken on the advice of his doctor. It was considered sensible for doctors to see the Prime Minister in person given he has ongoing symptoms. He remains in charge of the government, and is in contact with ministerial colleagues and